All right, let's just go ahead and start with the bad so that I can just get it out of the way. The level design for Metroid Dread really did not feel like a Metroid game. I was really on a guided tour of ZDR instead of being left to explore things on my own, which is what I expect from a Metroid game or anything in a Metroidvania. It's a key aspect of Metroid and of this entire genre. I did not get that with this game at all. It just guided me through the entire game and blocked off areas that I didn't need to get to at that time and always pointed me toward my next location. It started to feel like I was just getting things too quickly and moving forward too quickly, and I was fast approaching the end of the game, and I started to wonder, like, am I just better at this than I thought that I would be, or is something else going on? And it wasn't until probably a quarter or so of the way through my playthrough that I started to realize what was happening. After I would get to a certain point in the game, areas would be closed off to me that I no longer needed to go to. They would do this pretty invisibly. They did a fairly good job of hiding how linear the game was, but once I saw that, I could not unsee it, and I realized that it was a linear game and I was just being pushed in one particular direction. So instead of this vast, open, mysterious world, I am just constantly being sectioned off to parts where the level designers want me to be for this particular part of the game. This was a huge problem in Other M, one of the worst games in the Metroid franchise that is widely criticized by Metroid fans. I guess that maybe it's more friendly to newer players, but for the most part, it was just a bad Metroid experience in terms of the level design. And it's disappointing enough that I'm going to give the level design here 1 star. Next, I have to complain about the controls for Metroid Dread. The controls were pretty clunky sometimes. Occasionally it was because I just needed to get used to it and needed to improve my skills, but other times it just felt like a bad design choice and poor controller mapping, and there's only so much that you can do when it comes to remapping controls. There were some buttons that would have been great for being able to toggle different options instead of having to rely on button combinations. Things like being able to swap between the grapple beam and the missiles would have been a little more useful. Having to hold down a button throughout the entirety of a boss fight is really obnoxious, so I wish that that had just been a toggle instead of having to hold it down the entire time. Additionally, there are some puzzles that are made extra frustrating, not by their own merit, not because they're hard to solve, and not even because they're really challenging, but just because the controls can be really annoying. If the controls had been just a little better or a little more clear, or I'd had some on-screen indicators of what was happening and what was going to happen, that would have really helped me out. Really, the controls just didn't feel very natural and weren't all that intuitive. Long periods of play would just end up hurting my hands and I'd have to stop playing the game, especially boss fights. And that wasn't because I can't handle playing a game for a couple of hours, because I can. It's because the hand positions you have to use and constantly holding down a certain button to use the missiles throughout a boss fight just gets really frustrating and starts cramping up your hand. It would have been nice for them to have options that made that a little better. So I'm giving the controls for Metroid 2 stars, and I have one more complaint that I want to get to before I get to the good stuff. That complaint is for the ending of Metroid Dread. Metroid Fusion is my favorite Metroid game. Out of all of them, I'm considering Prime here. Metroid Fusion is my favorite of them all. And this game's ending followed a pattern similar to what we see in Metroid Fusion. I don't want to get into spoilers here, but if you've played Metroid Fusion, you know how that sequence of final boss fights go, and it was set up to do something very similar to that, and it got me really excited. I saw everything culminating and approaching that point and approaching this epic climactic battle. All of the pieces were there, and then it failed to deliver it, and so an epic ending that I was really enjoying, and it was totally going to be a 5-star point because I loved the actual final boss battle, but then they just gave me all of this promise for something even better than that, and it was shut down, and I was left disappointed with my final moment of Metroid Dread, and that really sucked. I'm really not sure why they decided to go the route that they did with that. Maybe it was because they wanted to make Samus feel extra powerful, but another way to do that would just be to give me this giant epic boss battle and let me just knock the crap out of this guy. Instead, I just get one shot in and I'm done. That was really disappointing for me and is going to be another 2-star point for this game. So 2 stars to the ending just because it really wound up disappointing me. So now I've got the bad things out of the way, I'm really excited to talk about the positives of this game because there was a lot to love here. Not just the fact that it was fun and I ultimately had a good time playing through it, but there's just a lot of good here that I would like to dissect. And I'm going to start with the level design. Yeah, that's right. I talked about how terrible the level design was and gave it 1 star, and now I'm coming back and saying it was good. And that's because I really want to be honest here. Even though the level design wasn't necessarily my cup of tea and wasn't what I look for in Metroid games, it really showcased just how far we've come in the game development industry when it comes to level design. They did a good job of making it invisible. If I didn't know anything at all about level design, I probably could have been fooled through the entirety of Metroid Dread and not seen that I was being handheld and on a guided tour through the planet, because they did such a good job of hiding the way that they were segmenting off parts of the world. It's not like they grayed out those parts of the map, it's that you just couldn't get to them whenever you tried to. So the level design was pretty solid in this regard. Even though it's not what I'd look for in a Metroid game, if this were any other kind of game, it would be absolutely brilliant. They did a really solid job with it and on guiding you without basically just putting arrows on the floor to tell you where to go. They just showed you the way because there was just a natural way to go. They also did a good job with leaving breadcrumbs for you to follow. While it's not the level design that I look for in a Metroid game, I have to give credit where it's due and say they did a really good job of creating a level design and creating a progression of gameplay in that level design that is largely invisible in the way that it holds your hand. So while I didn't personally like it, I am going to give it a 2nd score. In addition to the 1 star I gave it earlier, I'm also going to give the level design 4 stars, kind of a split mind sort of thing. I myself, as a Metroid fan, didn't like the way they handled level design, but I, as somebody who loves game design, have a lot of respect for the way that they did the level design. So 1 star and 4 star to the level design of Metroid Dread. So now I'm going to praise my favorite part of the game, and that was the bosses. Those boss fights were simply incredible. They did such an amazing job with every single one, except for one. There is one that was kind of annoying, but the rest of them were absolutely amazing and felt great, especially when you got those parry cutscenes and the final scene when you finally killed a boss. They always did such an incredible job with that. Every fight was memorable and is a fight that I would want to do again, including the ones that were just extremely challenging. The final boss fight in particular is one that I will always remember. They did an incredible job with that. It was an epic boss fight to end this saga for Samus on. It was incredible and I loved it. I have so much respect and appreciation for the way that they did the boss fights. Absolutely no complaints about the boss fights, except for one very minor complaint. There is one sort of mini boss fight that they repeat over and over again, and they kind of make it a little more challenging each time, but for me, it just got annoying instead of being something enjoyable. It was a part of the game that when I would get to one, I just kind of rolled my eyes and thought, okay, well, I don't have to do this crap again. It just wound up not being fun. I wish that there had been another way that they could have done that to make it more interesting and challenging, especially with how creative they were with the other bosses. It was a little annoying to have those boss fights be so repetitive and obnoxious. But that's such a minor complaint that it is not going to detract from the star rating, and I'm giving the bosses of Metroid Dread 5 stars. Next, I have to praise the atmosphere. It is one of the reasons why I play Metroid games in addition to the exploration factor. The atmosphere that they managed to capture in Metroid Dread was really excellently done. They did a fantastic job with the atmospheric music and sound effects, the way that each different area of the map has their own special theme and appearance, and they're all memorable, and I remember the different areas of them. Every part of it looked simply incredible, and there's occasional parts where you will zoom in on Samus and even get a different angle, and it kind of shows the three-dimensional aspects of this map, and even that always looked really great. There was always some point of interest in the background to look at. It was simply wonderful. I'm going to praise that a little bit more when I get to the next part, but really just the atmosphere and feel of this game. They captured it really well. And even though, yeah, I was on a bit of a guided tour through ZDR, I still felt that isolation that you want to feel in Metroid games. It wasn't quite as isolating as I like, but it was still very much an isolationist sort of feel. So I am going to give the atmosphere of Metroid Dread 4 stars. Now it's on to the next thing that I really enjoyed about this game, and that is going to be the visuals. Metroid Dread is just pretty. It is a very pretty game. The animations, the colors, the textures, everything about it is just really pretty. The effects are great. It feels great, not in terms of the controls, because I already mentioned how bad that is, but the responsiveness of it when you get the controls correct is really excellent, especially parrying. It always felt awesome to successfully parry something. I never got tired of doing it. Everything about the way that the game looks and feels and sounds. All of it is just so well crafted. There were a couple of textures that looked a little outdated for this day and age. Even on Samus, some of the textures were a little wonky, but overall, the art of this game is simply excellent. I just really loved the way that this game looked. This is going to be another 4 stars for me. The visuals and art of this really deserves the 4-star rating. Would be 5, but there were just some textures and things that didn't really look all that great to me, were a little low quality. Seeing the title of this game made me think that it was going to be as creepy and unnerving and awesome and fun as Metroid Fusion, but it fell short in a really important way, and that was the exploration of it. I know Metroid Fusion kind of blocks you off to different levels, but it wasn't nearly as aggressive in doing this as Metroid Dread was, at least not that I remember, and I've played Metroid Fusion pretty recently. Within the last year or so, I've played through it again. Metroid Dread was really aggressive about it, and that is going to tank the score for a game like this, because when I play a Metroid game and when I get excited about a Metroid game, one of the key things I get excited about is the exploration of it, and being robbed of that experience and that opportunity really sucked for me. It felt like exploration, which is a key element of a Metroidvania, was discouraged. So while there are a lot of elements of it that felt great, and while I had fun playing this game and will even recommend it to people, as far as a Metroid game is concerned, it just wasn't on par with what I expect from a game in this series. I really wanted to like this as much or more than Metroid Fusion. All of my expectations were that this was going to be at least as good as my favorite Metroid game. It had all of the pieces in place. It had that sense of fear and that tone of dread, and then it just didn't deliver on some really key areas of the Metroid series. So in the end, I'm left with, I would say 3.5 stars, but I don't really do half stars here, so it's going to be a 3-star game for me. It was fun and memorable, and I will probably play hard mode in the future, but it just wasn't the Metroid game that I was looking for, and it really failed to meet my expectations, and just is kind of a weak entry for me in the Metroidvania genre as a whole, and also in the Metroid series. So 3 stars to Metroid Dread. And my sincere hope as well that the next game in the Metroid franchise doesn't fall into this same pit and will encourage exploration further and encourage even non-linear gameplay to a more significant degree than we've seen lately. Thank you so much for taking the time to check this out. I hope that you enjoyed this review of Metroid Dread. You can also follow me on social media. I am at @TLBainter on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, with Instagram being where I am most active. And until the next one, bye.